So today in Blender, we're going to be learning how to make photorealistic caves. So before you do anything, go to the description and you can download these 4 assets that I've found on Sketchfab. So I went through a lot of them, and overall I think these ones are the best ones I found for the type of cave that we're going to be making. Okay, so once you have them down, import them into Blender as the FBX files. And once you've got them in, you can continue with the tutorial. Okay, so now that we have all of these, this is our sword, that we're going to have a sword in the stone. This is going to be like the one that you saw in the thumbnail. So we can just move these ones, that one away for now. Now let's add a cube. So this is going to act as the ground object for us. So we're going to scale that out, and we're going to shrink that down on the Z-axis. And we can place it like this size. Now we're going to build the walls and the roof of our cave. So we're going to use the same rock. So let's go into our pre-render mode, and you're going to wait for your textures to load in. That might bug down Blender, but once you've got them in, you're good. So that's what our rock looks like, and we can go move it backwards, up, and I'm going to move mine a little over here. So these rocks, for now, let's go into top view by hitting 7 on our keyboard. And you can see that it's not rotated fully, so we can just rotate that to GY. And we can move these guys away from now. Okay, so let's do Shift-D, GY, and move it right over here. And now we can rotate it by 100 degrees. So remember, if we rotate anything by 180 degrees, it's just going to flip it around fully. Now we're going to leave this back face open here, so that's how we're going to be able to actually view and put our camera inside without having to go inside a closed box. So we can duplicate that again. Right, oops, not the entire thing, just that wall. And now we can do RZ90, and that actually flipped it in the wrong direction. So if you look, we're going to have a very weird back wall of our structure. So we can do RZ180 and get that correct. Now, if you were to go inside right now, the first thing you might notice is it doesn't look like a cave. And the second thing is it's not tall enough. So let's just select all of our walls and let's duplicate it once. Oops. So you can see we're going to be moving that up right there. So we can just do Shift-D and place it and then do GZ. And now I was thinking, okay, so if we're going to be standing inside, we're going to see all of these ugly pieces of grass that should be on the ground, and that's where they're going to look good. But if they're standing up like that, it doesn't look great. And that's why we're going to flip these completely over. So we're going to do RY 180. You can see that now, if we were to move this up, and what I've found is that if we do like this and rotate it again, and then RC and do it like this. And what I've found is that rocks are very forgiving with merging their geometry. So if you were to place this down right now, you can see that you can't even tell that it's 2 pieces of rock. Like, look at that. It's just merged so well because rocks tend to generally not have a very, distinct pattern that the human eye can pick up on. So if you just move it just slightly like that, it looks like that's how it was made. And don't worry, we'll fix that grass in the roof later. Okay. But now, let's do the roof. And guess what? Again, we're going to be using the same asset. And this is going to be proof to you that you don't need to have gigantic libraries of assets to make a great scene. You can just use one asset, and if your lighting and if your lighting is right and your scene placement is right, nobody will tell. So we can do RX90, like that. And now, we're actually gonna rotate that by 90 degrees on the Z-axis. And let's place it right here. Now, what this is going to do is, actually here, sorry. Now, we're going to stretch this. So firstly, let's rotate it slightly and make it upside down. And even though it's going to look stretched because you're right now viewing it like this, because you've got full light right now and you're looking at it from the viewport. Remember, we're going to be inside of the cave. So we can stretch that a little less, because we're going to have a spot where some light comes in. Now, we're going to duplicate that one more time and scale it down a lot. And rotate it so that it kind of looks as real as you can get it. So if we, by rotating these, we're changing how the rocks are merging, because Blender is right now merging our geometry. If you look right here, you can see that the geometry is getting merged over there. So if we rotate it, it creates the illusion that it's actually new geometry. So you can see that if I move that around, it changes it. So you can do Shift D, place another one there, and now we can do RZ slightly, Shift D again, and then RZ, and let's just move it right here. So we have a little pocket of little opening for our cave for light to stream in, because we're going to be using volumetrics. So now if we go inside, you're going to see that we've got a really nice looking inside of our cave, and we can actually flip this because you see our floor is showing right there and we don't want that. So we're going to do RY 180. And now we can just move it back. And the reason why it's not flipping like you would think it would is because if you look here, you can see that the origin point where it rotates around is over there. So it's going to rotate like that. And we could do origin to geometry, but we're not going to be using this much, so I'm not going to do that. And let's just make it so that the grass is pointing the other way. So you can see again, it rotates around that origin point as if it's the center of gravity, which it isn't for what our purposes are, but we don't need to be using it that much. Otherwise I would do origin to geometry. And now you can see we've got a little pocket over there. And this is getting a little low for our purposes. So we can do it like this, and this looks pretty good. Now for the floor. So you might notice that you have two more assets here. So this one rock, we're not going to duplicate it much, and we're just going to take it and we're going to slide it into that corner right there. So I actually went through a lot of browsing on Sketchfab for correct and accurate models that really fit into the scene, and one of this photo scan of a rock here called Freiberg rock. Please correct me in the comments if I pronounce that wrong. So this one, and you can place it like that, and it just fits really well with our scene. In fact, even the grass on it blends. Now for the big rock that we have here. This is a really great photo scan, and I love it so much that even if you scale this up, it looks photorealistic, and that's and that's truly the test of how good, the quality of this. Like, look at it. It looks good even if you scale it up. It's not going to be scaled up that much. We're going to scale it up around there because we're going to have a big plateau in which our sword is going to be stuck into. So let's arrange this slightly and let us scale that up slightly around this much and put it down on the ground. And it's okay, as always, if it's sticking into the ground a little bit. Okay, so you see this? What I'm talking about is some of the geometry is going into the ground beneath the white plane. That's fine. You don't need to worry about that. And you can actually leave this part here. You can just leave it white like that, because we're going to be rendering at a certain angle. And the less geometry you have in your scene, the faster it's going to render, and the quality will be good as well because it will take less time. So we can just duplicate that there, and we can scale it down. Now, we're going to use a really cool technique that we use on the roof. And that is, we're going to merge our geometry like this so that it looks like it's new geometry when it really isn't. So we just need to do it like this. And if you notice on the thumbnail, you couldn't actually tell that it wasn't the same geometry. Unless you were actually, if this was a game, then you would have issues. If you're doing game development, you obviously need different geometry and different assets, and I'm totally fine with that. But if you're just doing a simple render, you know, you don't need that many different assets because it's just gonna cloud up your machine. So we can just move it up here, like there, and that should be good. We just need a few more. Just place that down there. And make sure that you don't use too many of these because, you know, it's just going to be unnecessary geometry. So try to cram them as small as you can. Don't use too many, and you should be fine. Okay, like these guys can just be little rocks there. Because remember, they're not going to be viewing in the final render, because if you see how we're looking at it on the thumbnail, it's not actually going to be showing. These are just going to be points for where our light and volumetrics can bounce off. So we're not going to be viewing this. You can even stretch that one slightly. Now, of course, like I said, don't do this if you're creating a game. Like, don't do it. It's just for our scene right now. And you can just lift that up there slightly. And overall, I think our scene is looking really nice. We've got a cool little opening, which could be worked on. But if you were to just move it into roughly the same position where it was in the thumbnail, you can see that we can we can really work with that. Now, only thing is you can't really see using your angle. You can't really see where the last part of the cave is. So you can just move that in slightly. Now, if you do that, you can see where the mouth of the cave is, and that looks pretty good, I think. So we can start with volumetrics now. You might be wondering, what in the world are volumetrics? Well, if you've ever seen fog or mist and how light creates rays using the particles, you'll know what they are, because they're that thick environment that really adds life to your scene. So how are we going to do it? Firstly, you're going to add a cube. You're going to scale up the cube, make it gigantic, and you can scale it down on the z-axis, because remember, less volumetrics for us to render then. It's not going to be really useful if it's out of the scene, right? And you might be thinking, what are you doing? Why? I don't want a cube here. I want volumetrics. Wait, we're going to go to the shadings tab now, and we're going to go to object. And if you select your object, you're going to add a new material to this. We're going to call this volumetrics. There we go. Now you're going to delete the principled BSDF, and instead you're going to add a principled volume right here. And now is the time where I'm going to tell you to go into pre-rendered mode and select cycles. So it's completely pitch black. And that's there for a reason. We do not have an environment. If you go here and see your world, it may not be there, but I had an HDRI on this earlier when I was testing this. So we can just add a texture, and for now, let us just add a sky texture, not point density. Right here, plug the color into the surface, and yeah, that's good enough for now, just to view this. And now, once that we have our actual sky texture here, if I go back to our object, you can see that, well, it's black. And I mean, it doesn't look great, does it? That's because we haven't plugged the volume in. So if you plug the volume into the volume, now you get like a really grayish blur, and you're like, why is this happening? So firstly, go here and make sure you have denoise checked, because it's going to be really useful in your scene. And secondly, it's because of the density. So if we set our density from 1 down to 0.3, wait, what? Why doesn't it work? That's because the density is not what we really need to set. If you see, if I just cut that node right there, if you put the volume into the surface, it's still black. So we're going to keep your volume in your volume, and you can try to reduce the density to 0.05. And you can see that we can start to see, so I misspoke earlier, it is the density, but we can barely see anything. So let's reduce our density even more. And remember, density is really, it's what adds the muskiness to your cave. Like, see, if I do 0.001, it just takes away the effect that we're wanting. A cave is murky. It doesn't look like a plane. It's as murky as you get. That's how much you want. So we're going to select all of this and scale it up slightly so that we can zoom in easier. And let's now try to change our density accordingly. So do this maybe around here. And that much is a lot. And you can see density is really important. So even if it takes you 5-10 minutes to get the correct density you want, it's worth it, because your scene is going to depend on it later. And I think that something of maybe around 0.01 will work really well. And you can see if we go back into our layout tab, pre-rendered mode, and you look like this, that is really nice. I'm even getting a little light there, a little crack in the rock. So now let's start with lighting. And before you're going to do lighting, you might notice, yes, we added our sky texture here. That's not ideal. So let's go back to the shadings tab, and you will have noticed that once you're in there, go in a world, and I've actually attached a HDRI of a beautiful night sky that I thought would work really well for the cave. You can use your own, but that's just one I've added. You can go and download that. Now you're going to go to add texture, and don't do image texture. It's a mistake that many beginners make. You don't want to do that. You want to do an environment texture, so right up here. Plug the color into the surface, and now you can see it's gone pink. That's because we don't actually have a file. So you can see if I go down here, and I can search for night, and you see that we've got this here. And okay, that just changed the entire look of the scene, because that is not emitting as much light as it was before. So you can see that if you orbit your scene, mine is already correctly angled at the stars over there. You can see, but you can just do A and do RZ and rotate your scene so that it fits the place that you want. Maybe you want a gigantic tree at the mouth of the cave, but yeah, so that's up to you. Now, let's again orient ourselves, and that's the mouth of the cave. And let's take our sword, which big shout out to the creator. I love this sword. It's from the Lord of the Rings. I'm a very big Lords of the Rings fan. It's called Anduril, and I thought it looked really good, and it just looks photorealistic. So let's actually bring that in to our scene and scale that up slightly. And rotate it on the x-axis. And yay, we're done. No, we're not done. We need to add lighting, because this sword, you cannot see anything with our volumetrics. And that's the point. But that's only the point because we're going to add lighting. So if you were to look at this right now, and you sent this, and you're like, oh, look at my render, the whole community is not going to like it, because look, you can't see anything. So we're going to add some lights, and mainly we're going to add a light on the sword, because the whole point of the sword and the stone is to look magical. And if it doesn't look like the main attraction, you're not going to be getting the intended effect you want. So we're going to do Shift A, mesh, and light, and then we're going to add a point light. Let's bring that up into our scene. And that is probably the dimmest and most useless light I have seen in my life. So let's fix that. Number one, let's change our radius and make it bigger. So this is going to be how much area our light will be affecting. And that's perfect. You want to get it a little past the sword tip and lots of distance there. And now let's turn up the power. So if I remember correctly, around 1,000 more. Don't crank it up too high. That's a little too much, as you can see. I think this should be enough. Yeah, that works. And now you're gonna change the color, because white light looks great, but it doesn't give our intended effect. So we're gonna do a little bit of a yellowish, majestic gold highlight over that, and very faint. You don't want it to be like the most. We frame it. Wow, that actually looks really great. If I select that, I think I can turn that down slightly to a little bit of a greenish tinge there, because the lighting is what's really going to bring out our scene. And if you look at it now, that is beautiful, but our radius, as you can see, is a little bit off. It's too much. Let's turn down our radius slightly. And let's also actually turn down the light on second thought, maybe around 7,000 watts. Even less is what we're aiming for, because you can see it's kind of blotting it out. 6,000 watts would, 5,000. Let's try 5,000 right here. And that is correct. So now what we want is, you can notice that we're not getting much, light bouncing around. So the reason for that is we have to go back into our shadings tab, and we're going to do a little editing on our fog. So if you select our cube, that's going to be our camera right there, we're going to select our cube, and you can't see the selection because we're actually selecting our entire cube right there. So if we're going to go down here to object, see we got nothing there. Change it to cube 1, and we got this here. And I'm going to change the color. And you might not think of this at first, but if you make the color a little bit darker, it changes how it gives the effect that the fog isn't as thick as it looks. So even though the fog is there and we're getting all of these beautiful caustics and light bouncing, it's giving the effect as if the fog as if the fog was turned down, but we're still getting nice light bouncing. And now you can turn up your power to like 7,000 watts, I think. And we are almost ready to render. Let us change the radius again to around there. Get in our frame here. And I keep tweaking the light because it just needs to be perfect for this scene. And now you can see that, by the way, when Cycles is first rendering, it's going to make everything look really weird because it's rendering it slowly. So in case you're a beginner to Blender and you don't know much, that's what it's going to be doing. So if you actually, another thing I like to do is I like to experiment with different styles. So if you were to actually shrink down our radius here and put it down here, it kind of bounces upwards through the rock, which is a really cool effect that you can do. But I'm going to move it around here, midpoint on the blade where the cross is of the guard. And then I'm going to go back to our fog, which is not looking so great. So we're going to select our cube right here and change our density to 0.005. And that, I think, is ready for rendering. Let's go back to our layout. Yes. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our camera and we're going to make sure you've got N, and you want to get your camera to lock to your view because that is how you can move the camera around while still viewing what's inside of it. And this is what we had earlier, but our camera is only showing what's inside of this box. So let's make sure our camera is selected and we can change the focal length to zoom in or out. And a focal length of around 42, depending on how you framed it. You might have framed it differently. And that's good. And also, I like to get a different perspective on things. And you might notice that our sword is not actually getting illuminated first. So you might want to move that a little closer, so that it's actually putting on the blade. You can see this is also zoomed there. So let's move it around here. It's always good to rotate around your scene because you don't know what perspective you're gonna have when you're posing your stuff. And it's always good to go into like a top view and move your light so that is actually illuminating the blade. So now if we go into camera view, it's a whole different ballgame. Turn up our radius. We're actually nicely illuminating the sword. And depending on what you want, you could also angle it more towards you. I think I'm going to do a little bit around here so that we can see the 3D-ness. And I think it's ready to render. So let's go and render that out. And once this is rendered, you should be able to see a beautiful sword scene that you've done. And now you know how to make interesting caves in Blender. So if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. That would really help me out. And I will see you guys in the next one.